Hi, Helen.
Hi,
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great. How's your healing of your
My healing is great. I saw a doctor Tuesday.
okay? Oh,
A little sore. I hadn't walked in 2 months.
oh, in 2 months?
Well, not, I mean, I used to walk 4 miles
Oh, okay.
2, 3 times a week from
Wow.
exercise, and I hadn't done that in a long, long time.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of walking.
Well, we'll see if I did 2 miles, two
Okay.
different times, 2 different days. So
How long does it take you to walk 4 miles?
hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half.
So you're moving along pretty nicely.
Yeah, yeah.
About a 20-minute mile?
I've never timed it, but and it's very imprecise. I take my iPhone with me
Uh-huh.
because I have about half of the time I listen to a book.
Oh.
And so I pull that out. How many miles have I gone? And then I have a little Fitbit also
Oh,
that I sometimes wear, and they never completely jive.
no.
The Fitbit says I've done more than the iPhone does, so I don't really know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I figure if I do that walking, I'm doing
Yeah,
okay.
that's great. Good. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed last week.
Well, we're definitely in the wind down stage on Richard Rohr.
Hmm.
And there may be some of us, to include myself, that are pretty happy that we're ending today.
Well, it was okay. One thing I did think about as I was watching last week's
Uh-huh.
is that sometimes we have more than one upward.
Oh,
'Cause we can have times when we sort of fall again and then or get complacent into that, or maybe we go up and then we plateau and then we go up better.
oh, good. Yeah, I like that.
And that just had occurred to me as I listened to you all.
Well, I'm just impressed that you listened to the recording. My goodness,
Well, I listened to the other one that I missed.
you're amazing.
I'm a rule follower. If I say I'm gonna, I'm no Girl Scout. If I say I'm
Wow.
gonna do something, I do it. I get it done.
Okay.
That's why I'm really worried about reading 2 chapters a week with this one and the next one, and then 2 chapters a week for uh Love is the Way.
Um,
Is that the name? Is that the right name?
yeah. Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. One book we had the chapters were 30 pages long. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, Nancy brought that up last week too, and it is concerning how many books we're reading. So, and I'll bring this up for the group as well. Hi, Gloria. I want to say hi to you.
Hi, hi. And I will say this,
Yeah.
Love is the Way. You won't have any problems reading 2 chapters, Helen.
Oh,
None
okay.
whatsoever.
Well, I have my murder
Because-
mysteries too. I read.
Well,
That's
I do
my
all that
late
too.
at night.
I do all that.
That's my
Yeah.
late at night before I go to bed, and your mind's just kind of on autopilot.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to think.
I wonder if Love is the Way is on audiobook. Because that would be an easy way to go through 2 chapters a day.
Yeah, but
Well,
I
that's
really
true.
want to read it and mark things that
Oh, you do? Okay.
I like, even if it's just on a Kindle.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well, we've got just a minute. Bill and Susan will not be with us. And let's see, not sure about Art. I think Art was planning on being here. Nancy hasn't said anything, so maybe she'll show up too.
Yeah, she was at church. I'm sure she's driving home.
Oh, yeah.
It takes
Were
her
you
a few minutes.
Were you at the 10:30 service?
Yes,
Yeah.
Usher, we had 74.
Wow.
Yeah.
With the social distancing and all that still?
We tried our best. Some people that knew each other very, very well and knew they were all vaccinated and, kind of sat together. But Tom and I ended up having to pull in chairs
Huh.
To sit at kind of the entrance coming from the back because we needed to sit over there as ushers and
Yeah.
it gets a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
anyway, we're getting it. About the time we get it all down and worked out, the pandemic will be over.
Yeah. It's just, we can see the signs coming.
I hope
Yeah.
if people will get vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, it seems like most Episcopalians are pretty cool with that.
I haven't I understand there's a letter to the editor today and from a woman that
Oh.
I actually have known for many, many, many years. And her husband was a physician and
Huh.
she says you don't need to or something. I don't know.
What? And her husband's a physician and she
Well,
said
he's
that?
no longer living, but she's like
Oh.
my age. And yeah, I don't know.
Amazing.
She's not an Episcopalian.
Yeah, okay. Well, that says it all, Helen. Well, should we go ahead and dive on in?
Sure.
And
Sure.
Hey,
Hey,
Peter. Hey, how you doing, Peter?
Good. I'm here playing software. I mean, internet man.
Internet man. All right.
Oh,
It's not working. Guess I need a chair, don't I?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. There.
All right.
Yeah.
There. Now you're comfy, sort of.
I am. I'm so excited about it.
Well, I thought for our check-in today, we could kind of pick up on Mother Janice's illustration or introduction for her sermon, where she talked about going and visiting her mom and just that emotion of just being there in the presence, even though she's seen her on Zoom weekly. But just kind of interested or invite you to think about, now that you're vaccinated, have you had any interesting ahas or experiences of being out there and a little bit more and with people in person? Any experiences?
Oh, yeah. I'm a member of a lot of different groups in a number of boards and then some social groups. So working, volunteering, social, and all kinds of stuff. And we had our first museum board meeting in person.
Okay.
A week or I think it was last week. I can't remember. Time kind of was weird. I don't know if our CAC will be doing that in person, but I've rejoined my Belton Bridge group.
good.
I haven't met with them in 14 months, and that was fun. Our supper club that's been meeting for 42 years is
Oh,
having its first gathering tonight.
wow.
Wow.
So that's really been fun
Neat. Cool.
for me.
Okay. How about Gloria? You're not
Well-
really getting out that much, are you, though, Gloria?
No, I went to the Monday, Thursday service at church
Okay.
because I sat in the back with Amy and there weren't really a whole lot of people. And so that was my first experience. And I may talk to myself about going to church eventually, but Amy and I have gone to 2 art museums.
Ah,
We did spend the night in Houston. And we actually had a couple of friends over for dinner one night.
ah,
We've all been vaccinated. And so we felt comfortable doing that. I'm beginning to feel comfortable. I still don't go to the large grocery stores. I'm still picking up my groceries.
mhm,
And Amy picks up, like today, she picked up a prescription for me.
mhm,
Of course, I've been seeing doctors.
uh-huh.
and it's really kind of funny because they ask you all those questions. I mean, I went to 3 doctors in 1 week, and then I went last week a couple of times. And I will say, no, I don't have any of the symptoms. And yes, I'm fine and blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, well, I've had both vaccinations. And they just stand there. And one person said, well, I'm really surprised. And I went, do I look like an idiot? But I guess there are still people who have not gotten vaccinated and maybe not from their choice. But anyway, I'm feeling more and more comfortable about doing that, but not really getting in a crowd of people, not really. I'll work on going back to church, but not right now.
Okay, gotcha. No need to tempt fate.
No. And especially right now, I have an infection in both lungs. Slight,
Oh, okay.
Slight
Oh,
infection.
Gloria.
No, just slight infection, just slight. And as a matter of fact, right before I got on, I'm reading about, I'm supposed to take a Z-Pack next week. And so I was reading about, the side effects and what to look for and all of that. And I thought, I'm just going to put it away and do it. And no, it's just very, very slight. So thank God for that. But,
Yeah.
it's just right now, I don't really need to be exposed to anything, So,
Right. That's the thing.
Anyway.
There's so much else out there with.
but
cold.
anyway, I think after this Z-Pack, I'll be able to breathe a little bit better. So, hey, I'm all for it.
Okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
Uh,
I'm good.
Well, Peter, how about for you, as you've been out and about?
My life hasn't changed a whole lot ever since COVID started. I see my one patient. That's an 11-hour shift. So that's 4 days a week of just go to work, come home,
Yeah.
work. And then the other 3 days, lay low. But now that I've been inoculated at both shots, I used to go to pick up this and that at stores, and I caught COVID getting my hair cut.
Yeah.
Which didn't work out real well.
Yeah.
No.
Gloria, how do you get your hair cut? I guess sometimes you get your hair cut, right? Anyway, no, not a lot of change for me.
Okay. Peter, do you still have any side effects from or complications from when you had COVID?
No, not that I don't.
You're not a long-termer then.
Which I'm all very thankful for.
Indeed. So grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Sabiha, can you hear us at all?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Have you had your vaccines yet?
Yes.
Great.
Oh, great.
Have you started getting out into the world a little bit more?
No.
No, okay. No need to tempt fate, right? Yeah. Okay. Art, we're just checking in and picking up on the introduction for Mother Janice's sermon, where she talked about going and seeing her mom, and even though she'd seen her on Zoom for last year, but just the great sense of being there in person and touch. So we're just talking about experiences that we've had of getting out in the world a little bit more. Anything for you then, Art?
Well, I guess the only thing in that is it's kind of interesting the way things sort of blend together here in our community Bible study. We're at the very end of the Gospel of John, where the disciples are touching and seeing Jesus.
Yeah.
And in touching them
Yeah.
is the reality of the resurrection. Finally dawns on them.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
funny how those all blended together this
All
week.
blend together. Yeah, cool. Well, see, Friday night I taught at the Iona School for Ministry, and it usually meets every month in Camp Allen, but we've had to take a number of months off and just do it by Zoom. Hi, Nancy.
Good afternoon. I just got home and grabbed a bite to eat, so I'm late.
Okay. Do you have to break any speed laws to get home?
No, it's just a long haul.
Well, we're just picking up on Mother Janice's introduction about the feeling of actually being in person with her mom and just sharing some experiences of getting out now and having in-person experiences. And I'm just sharing that this month for Iona school, we met at Camp Allen. Every one of the students that I have in my class were actually there, so we didn't even have to get on our computers. No Zoom for the first time since September.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and we were all vaccinated and we took off our masks.
Oh,
And just the whole mood of the place was just so interesting, because the other months it's been kind of down, people are exhausted. There's a lot of emotional stuff, but there was this buoyancy. Humor was coming up. It was just really kind of neat to see. So I was glad to experience it. Nancy, how about for you? Have you gotten out and
Well, I was at
experienced?
church this morning and it was wonderful.
Uh-huh.
First time I was back in the church for a service.
Oh.
I probably won't do it often yet because my
Uh-huh.
husband's health is not great, but we're vaccinated, but still it's kind of scary when you read about these things out there and whether or not you're truly protected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Janice's sermon was really great this morning. And I
Your
could
talk was lovely. your talk was
identify
lovely.
with it. Well, Helen, there was a lot that I wanted to say and it just went out of my head. I'm not a public speaker, so that's it. But yeah, I was glad to do it. And what I wanted to get across was I hope they still continue with the Zoom classes. I could never do small groups unless they do. And that's the truth. I'm not driving at night and I live too far away to come in at 5:30 or 6 for a class. It's just not a great time for me.
Yeah. That has been one of the strange blessings of this whole thing, is getting Zoom. And to be able to offer it both in person and in Zoom, what a great thing for people.
Yes.
It's like we just broke down all the walls that keep people in.
Well, it's also a blessing to be able to talk with all you, when we're isolated and not able to see each other. This is just wonderful.
It is
Right.
great.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful we can keep that as well. So we are going to finish up on Richard Rohr's book of Falling Upward. And we're going to be, of course, in this last chapter, we're talking about the falling. And I went through pretty much all the collects in the Book of Common Prayer to try to find anything that will support or name or identify that spiritual journey that is part of falling downward, and so that we can rise upward. Only found one and possibly two, but the one that I found was for Holy Saturday, and it does name and allows us that time to go into the grave with Jesus, where a lot of the spiritual journey is going into that grave or into that valley where we get scooped out. That's the spiritual formation plan of life, is that we end up with a crucifixion or an ending, and then we go into this grave or neutral zone, desert, sometimes it feels like, and we get scooped out and we become new people, and then a new beginning or a resurrection occurs. And Helen, that kind of goes along with your thought, that there are numerous times throughout our life that we go through these transitions, not just once. So it's not all about building up the first half of life in order to fall. It's actually multiple times throughout both phases of our life. And we'll get into that a little bit today. So I want to just read the prayer for Holy Saturday with you. The Lord be with you.
And
Also with you.
O God, creator of heaven and earth, grant that as the crucified body of your dear Son was laid in the tomb and rested on this holy Sabbath, so we may await with him the coming of the third day and rise with him to newness of life, who now lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
So in a little bit, I'm going to kind of go through the broad brush strokes of the entire book, the thesis of the book. But before we do that, I just want to see, was there anything in this chapter that stuck out to anybody that you really liked?
Mhm.
Anything connect for you?
I liked the part about, how we we have how we perceive ourselves and we get feedback from others, either good or, and it was only those who respond to the real you, good or bad, that help you in the long run. Those are your true friends.
Mhm. Yeah. And that was that in that section on mirroring, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that a familiar concept to you all about mirroring? Or was that kind of new? Because it's a,
Having it put in words is not, the concept is very familiar to me. I was talking to Suzanne about this, where he says, you can do this well only if you have at least one loving, honest friend to ground you, which might even be the utterly accepting gaze of the friend. But she said, was this guy ever married?
No.
no, he was not.
That explains a lot.
It does explain a lot. Yeah, that's right. So mirroring, the concept comes from research that's been done on mothers' gazes to their children. So it's particularly with infants, that the mother's gaze, they've done research that it actually releases a whole bunch of stuff that happens for brain development. And particularly, there's these things in the brain called mirror neurons. I don't know if anybody's heard of those or not, but those get triggered inside the brain, and all kinds of new interesting things happens then in brain development for infants. So they've also realized, okay, it's pretty kind of a problem if someone has postpartum depression, because then they're giving a blank face instead of that loving gaze, and it causes some attachment problems for their children. So, there's all kinds of reasons then, that and mother suicide is the reason now that nursing moms are put on medication so that they can get the lift from that depression, so that the children can then, that the infant can really grow and developmentally. But anyway, Daniel Siegel did research, and he I don't know exactly how he does this, if it's actually something he saw in the brain development or if he's conceptualizing it. But he says that eventually the child develops this internalized sense of the other. And that's the mom now exists even when she's not in the room. And that's allows the child then to start to have some more autonomy and to step out into the world, go to school, stuff like that, because they have that attachment, internalized sense of the other, of their mom, that allows them to grow socially. Anyway, when he refers to mirroring, he's drawing on this concept that God is like that for us. And when we sit in meditation and in prayer, for us to be able to experience the loving gaze of God into our souls, if you will, that that's when the real spiritual stuff starts to happen for us. It's an internalized sense of the other, of God being inside of us. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful or not, or if it means anything, but I just wanted to share that because he talks about when we fall, and how that deep shame that we have when we do something wrong. And maybe some of you have never done anything wrong.
Oh.
But I know I've run that.
Good laugh.
I've done a few laps around that
Good laugh.
myself on a daily basis. And it's a great reminder to realize that, well, when God looks at me, especially after I have done something really awful again, that God's gaze is that of love. I do love it when he said that, like a good spiritual director, that God can look at our failings and his response, rather than saying, well, you awful person, horrible sinner. Instead, God's response, anybody remember reading that?
Yeah, I've got it
Okay, go
highlighted
for it.
right here. It said, the gaze of God receives us exactly as we are, without judgment or distortion, subtraction or addition. Such perfect receiving is what transforms us. Being totally received as we truly are is what we wait and long for all our lives. All
Yeah.
we do is receive and return the loving gaze of God every day. And afterwards, we will be internally free and deeply happy at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's more, but obviously.
But yeah, it's beautiful. It's at that, I think when Augustine said, our hearts are restless till they find their rest in thee, O Lord, that he's referring exactly to what Rohr has just picked up. That's this mothering gaze of God that just receives us and loves us. He also mentioned something about God is like the ultimate spiritual director. When we fail, God's response is, oh boy, now let's see what we can do with that. And, just that sense of, we just can't break it. And even if we do break a few things, God, I shouldn't say God is like art. Art is like,
No,
but anyway.
don't say that, please.
It's horrible. But anyway, God can take the broken pieces, like if we break glass, God as an artist can take all the broken pieces and put them together into something beautiful like stained glass. It's just that potential and that power and that love is just so amazing. Okay, anything else anybody liked about the chapter?
I like the part about the lamp of the body is the eye. If the eye is healthy, your whole body will be filled with light. I not really thought about that, but that's right. It's a matter of learning how to see. And if you see truthfully and honestly, yes, I like that.
Yeah.
It just sort of puts it right out there.
Yeah, sure does. Great. Anything else?
I like that he said, no, nothing keeps you from the second half of life except you.
Yeah.
Right.
In other words, kind of your own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to ask a question though, on the mirroring. And then he goes and talks about St. Clare of Assisi, and she is instructing her people to just look into a mirror and just stare into that mirror, and you receive your reflection back, but eventually I guess you see the gaze of God. But then he talks about mirroring being, as Helen put it, where you get feedback from people.
Mhm.
So sounds like, but then he says we can't mirror ourselves, but yet that looked like what St. Clare was doing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I was confused.
Yeah. Well, some people can stare into a mirror and just look on themselves critically. So, but I mean, some children have grown up with very critical parents who are just gifted in finding the things that are wrong with that child. And that gets internalized. And then when that person looks in the mirror, they're like, they see what their parents pointed out. So for us to be able to look in the mirror and to see through the eyes of God what God sees, that's that shift, I think. That would be my guess. Anybody else have a way they put together that whole thing with mirroring and looking in an actual mirror, as well as the social feedback aspect? The social feedback, I did want to point that out. I think that's where the real mission of the church and us as individual people, that if we can receive this loving gaze from God, that to the point where it really transforms us, then I think our mission in the world is to go out and to look on other people in a similar way, and we're really being quite counter-cultural, because most cultures give a pretty negative perspective on most people. If you fit in the perfect way, if you play the script right, then you get positive rewards and feedback. But if you're anything of a rebel, or if you're just a little bit outside of the norm, there's a lot of negativity that especially kids in school receive from their peers, and it continues on through life. So for us to extend the mirroring gaze, that's Christian witness, right?
Well, to look in the mirror literally, or to look at it inside yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now with Claire, she was actually, it's interesting historically. I wonder what a mirror in the 12th century looked like. It was probably just polished, some kind of metal. Does anybody know? So it was pretty vague. It was kind of like Paul, I would imagine, saying, we look in a mirror darkly. So they didn't really have a great image there, but it was something that they could look at. And otherwise, they didn't have a lot of feedback as to how they actually looked, except for the responses from other people. So when she was saying to look in that mirror, I think she was probably talking about an actual polished mirror and getting some kind of a response back that they could eventually start to accept and to maybe even fall in love as a form of prayer, that we can see ourselves in a glimpse of how God sees us. But then when you go deeper from the face or from the skin level depth and go into the deep part of prayer, I think that adds that full dimension in there. And that's where the really good stuff's going on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you like about the chapter? I liked that he finally mentions the thesis statement. And in page 147, at the end of the book, he says, the whole thesis of this book, well, I'll start from the beginning. It's the first paragraph. Most of us tend to think of the second half of life as largely about getting old, dealing with health issues, and letting go of our physical life. But the whole thesis of this book is exactly the opposite. What looks like falling can largely be experienced as falling upward and onward into a broader and deeper world where the soul has found its fullness, is finally connected to the whole, and lives inside the big picture.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is to take a bit of a review of Richard Rohr's concepts of the spiritual journey, and just look at what this book's kind of been about. Does that sound okay to everybody? You ready? Okay, now we're doing the scary part. I'm going to hit share screen. Are you seeing Bev?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go to the full. Here we go. So this is not Richard Rohr, but it fits into his concept of falling upward in a way that I'm just going to offer to you in case it has a meaning to you. And before we started class, Helen had mentioned that she listened to last week's recording and had an aha that we actually fall upward multiple times throughout our lives. It's not just this one big one. So I'm sharing with you this transition model, and this was developed by a guy named William Bridges. And the story behind this is that when we were in Desert Storm, and remember how quick that war was? It was like, 100 hours on the ground. And then we sat in the desert for 4 or 5 months, just roasting first freezing and then roasting. And we would have these like classes as well as our chapel services in these little operating bases. But then towards the end, the chaplaincy sent out a bunch of books, one for every chaplain, that we were supposed to teach this transition model so that people would feel good about when they get fired from the military. So did you all heard about the rapid reduction in force that occurred right at the end of Desert Storm? So we had all these folks sitting in the desert, And instead of being able to continue on with a career, they were going to be let go within the next year to two. And they wanted the chaplains to give them this message that don't worry, when you have an ending, it's all going to be okay, because you're going to basically fall upward. So here's the model that Bridges teaches in the book. He said that at any point in our lives, we are at some phase of transition. And he said every transition begins with an ending. And then the person falls into this, he called it a neutral zone, where they stay for quite some time and learning a new normal, figuring out who they are, and then gradually move up to a new beginning. So since I had to teach it over and over and over again to all kinds of groups of soldiers, eventually I began to realize that he's naming the Paschal mystery, that we're talking about crucifixion, go into the grave, and then resurrection. And that it's the plot line of our lives. This is the way we live. We go along in life and we hit a crucifixion and we fall and we go into the grave or the neutral zone, where we let go of all this grief and loss, and we learn a new normal. And then we get scooped out and become compassionate. Anyway, the neutral zone is where all this great spiritual formation is occurring. And then we enter into a phase of new beginning. So I think that, Helen, does that help at all with seeing that we go through this falling upward over and over and over again in our lives?
I do. And like I said, whether or not it's falling completely back down again, it may be more that you've almost plateaued and think, okay, I've got it now. Well, no, maybe I really don't have it. Maybe I need a little more enlightenment or something. But yeah, that's the same thing.
Yeah. We run this cycle repeatedly throughout our lives. And it's, we celebrate it every Sunday at the Eucharist, right? So we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again. The whole Eucharistic prayer is based on the Paschal mystery. So we are celebrating and naming and showing that God came into human life and went through this cycle, and we do too. And that everything we put onto the altar gets transformed. So when we put not just the bread and the wine, but ourselves, our souls, and our bodies, we put it up there, figuratively speaking, and then we become transformed. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you because it's another way of looking at falling upward, that you'll notice that the line for when there's an ending, it does go down deeply, but then when it comes up to the new beginning, it's higher. So that's the falling and the upward movement eventually. Any thoughts or questions about that from anybody? Okay, let's see if we can move on.
I do have a thought about that.
Okay.
You mentioned that it's what we do weekly. This came out of a Forward Day by Day podcast, which is given by a priest. And he mentioned in this that because it was related to the scripture for that day, one of his parishioners, when they kneel for communion, unlike most of the other parishioners who would either say thank you or amen when they took communion, he would hold the host up and say, "My Lord and my God." And I thought that is starting a new beginning every week.
Every week, absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. Huh. Yeah. Thanks, Art. Yeah, and as we realize that, okay, the Paschal mystery is not just a one-time historical event, which it is, but it's also, it shows us the plot line of our lives, and it shows us this is how it is to follow Jesus, that we will go along and we can eventually, after we've gone through this pattern multiple times, we can trust the process then, so that the next time there's an ending and a crucifixion, that though we grieve and experience a loss, we do not do so as those who have no hope, because we know that there will, after every crucifixion, there will be a resurrection. There is nothing so bad in your life that it will not be followed by a resurrection. But in our culture, we always want to jump from the crucifixion or the ending to the new beginning, right? Our whole culture is organized so that we don't do this down in the grave thing. And that's why I went through all the collects in the Book of Common Prayer to try to find something that says, hey, the neutral zone is real. Let's support people in there, because that's where the real spiritual formation occurs, in our being down in that. So anyway, Richard Rohr kind of talks a little bit about that as well, that there's too much denial or anxiety around the falling. People just want to move upward all the time.
I think I'll use that, but it's going to be real practical in the explanation you gave for this. I think the great fear of, the end is there. This is for my daughter. She a divorce is coming.
Yeah.
But she doesn't step off that cliff. At least we haven't even had a chance to talk about it much, but I know that it's the jumping off that cliff and going in the neutral zone and going through that part of spiritual formation, that it's okay to do that. But when it's such a big dive, people, yes, are looking to go from, that's an ending, now I'm ready for the new beginning, but if I jump off, I'm taking a dive, can't I just go and find a way to get to the new beginning?
Right.
And the answer is no.
Exactly.
You don't want to do that either.
Yeah. Now, there are some artificial ways to jump to what feels like a new beginning, and it's available to every adult in our culture. Drugs, alcohol, certain process addictions, like pornography and gambling, compulsive shopping, there's all kinds of things. Now, a little bit of this and that, not terrible, but there are some people just dive into that and they wallow in it. And rather than turning to other people for support, they'll turn to substances or something else. That's the biggest fear with people in the neutral zone. If they don't have enough support, and if they don't value that this is actually a necessary part of their growth, is to go through this time. But yeah, Peter, you're exactly right. It's nothing that anybody really wants to do, but I would imagine that for all of us here in this class, that we can look back on our lives and probably see that the greatest growth we've experienced has been in the neutral zone. So let me just test that. Does anybody see that in their own life?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely was the word. Ms. Helen, go ahead.
No, I've talked too much. You go ahead.
No. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I went through a divorce. Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the growth is great. And I think even, our kids can see that in both adults that came out the other side.
Yeah.
It was terrible, but.
Yeah, it's not something people would, want to choose themselves. But it's still something that God can bring growth out of all this stuff, out of anything. And it's just amazing what God is able to do when we're in that neutral zone, down in the grave, crawling around the caves. Again, not something most of us want to rush towards, but when it happens, we can have that confidence that in Psalm 23, when we read that basically the psalmist is saying, God's not going to really save you from a whole lot of stuff in your life, but God will walk with you through this entire process. And that valley of the shadow of death is that neutral zone or wilderness that we see in this transition.
Yes, as I was going through a year and a half of chemo,
Mhm.
after about 3 months into it, I was hospitalized because everything just crashed.
Mm.
And then I still had to have the treatments. It was once a week,
Mhm.
every week. And I got to a point where I didn't eat, but I had to eat to live.
Yeah.
And I was really in a bad place, but I just supported my daughter and the support of my faith. And I just said, I have to eat. It doesn't matter. I have to eat and I have to eat. And I finally came out of that darkness. And
Mhm.
even though I still wasn't happy about eating,
Mhm.
I did reach a plateau of sort to get out of that. But it is pretty dark.
It is
when
so
you're
dark. Yeah.
And you do have to bring yourself out. But
Mhm.
I really think if it hadn't been for the love and support of my daughter and my friends and my faith, it would have been hard to have gotten through that.
Yeah.
And I did see people who were struggling because they didn't have the faith,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
struggle even more.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a struggle with the best of conditions. But to go through it without a sense of hope and faith,
Oh,
or without the support of other people, oh my gosh. I mean, it would just be
I can see why people give up sometimes. They
absolutely,
just take their life. I
absolutely.
can see
Yeah,
why they do that.
that's the ultimate way of getting out of the neutral zone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you all. This is the way that Richard Rohr and Ronald Rolheiser kind of depict the broad brushstrokes of the journey. And the first part of life refers to this building of a life, this journey of finding out who you are, what you're going to spend your life doing, who you're going to spend your life with. And that can take, up to 35 years or so. But
Yeah.
usually by that time, most people have an idea, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to be with, etc. And that forms that self-identity and then eventually people hit a crisis of limitation where what they have and the way they're able to keep things together just no longer quite works. And they go through not just one of those transitions, but kind of like the big transition. So in the building of a life, we have a whole pile of transitions, and some of them are wanted. Every phase of human development is a transition, and I think almost all of those are welcome. And then getting married, that's a huge transition. That's the end of the single life, and it's the going into a neutral zone of, okay, how are we going to work this thing out together? How are we going to spend our time and our money in a way that doesn't annoy each other? And so there's lots of transitions building up to this time. But then the crisis of limitation, there's something about that one that's huge. That's the big transition. When this person who's got it together experiences this huge loss and they can't do anything to get themselves out of it. It's just feels like a free fall, and self-esteem goes way down, depression goes way up, anxiety starts kicking them. There's just this horrible thing. Anyway, everybody cool with that? And then Rohr says that people, when they hit that crisis of limitation, they've got what he sees are three options. And the first and he uses the terms of fool. This is not in this book. This is in some of his other books, but Falling Upward fits into this framework. He uses the term fool, which sounds really denigrating, but in a Franciscan transition, the Franciscan tradition, it is a term that is used fondly because Francis called himself a fool. And when he went before the Pope in the 12th century and he wanted to start this new religious order, the Pope said, why don't you just go be a Benedictine and join one of their monasteries? And Francis said to him, no, I want to be a new kind of fool for God. And so he became this holy fool. Anyway, that's the background. So it's not denigrating from this Franciscan tradition. But he sees one option for people who hit that crisis of limitation is to just double down and work harder and to hold on to that identity and those things that give them the identity, like possessions and income and power and stuff. And to just double down and to keep trying to do the first half of life in the second half of life. And so he calls that the old fool. The second option is the embittered journey. And he says that there are some people, when they hit the loss and they fall downward, they just stay down and they form their new identity around bitterness. And we can see that in people who are really resentful and say, well, what have they done with my world? Why have they done this? And they just remain bitter, not able to accept the changes. They sour. Then he said there's this third option that, and this is the recommended one, he says, is the person who embraces the downward fall. And to realize, okay, the game of life now is to see how much I can give away and end up my life with as little as possible of things, but as rich as possible in God and in relationships of love. And with creation. So this is that downward descent. It's the ultimate second half of life, which it doesn't come out as much in this book, but it does in some others. So I wanted to throw that at you to get your response, to see what that feels like and sounds like to you. Any thoughts?
Well, how does that jive with the falling upward? You
Well,
have a downward thing.
That's the ultimate going downward is to be filled with God. So that's the upward part. So if my life is,
yeah,
if in the first half of my life, I know it was about filling my life up with stuff, with marriage and family and house and all the things and the income to support that. And Rohr says, and that's good. It's not wrong. The first half of life, to just do that, he says, is important to build the container. And then when we hit that point of the crisis of limitation, it's either an invitation from life against our will, or some people just say, I don't need to continue the first half of life anymore. I'm good. And then they can embrace this downward path of just getting rid of the things that got in the way of the relationships in the first part of life. And that includes relationship with God and with other people and all of creation.
Oh, so you were talking about the old fool in the last, see, I didn't know which fool you were talking about.
Yeah, I wish I knew how to point on these slides with the thing.
The top one. Okay, I'm sorry, I had misunderstood you.
Yeah, the top one is if I had decided, and to be honest with you, I am still a bit of an old fool. I still think about, well, am I going to have enough money and how can I make more? I really need to get away from that game, but it's still there. It's hard to just step away completely from the first half of life in the second half of life. So I struggle with it. This idea of embracing a new way of living that focuses on love of God and others as the primary, and then having, just enough so that I don't become a burden on others. It's kind of what Francis and Rohr are talking about. It's pretty countercultural. It's not necessarily something that our church has really embraced either. But I want to throw it out there, not recommending it, but getting an idea of what you all think of that. Any strong negative reactions?
Trying to unmute.
Yeah.
This is maybe off topic a little bit,
Yeah.
but in our small group, we started a new book called Resilience.
Uh-huh.
And reading the first 2 chapters of that book, it kind of fits the same pattern because you have a good life and then maybe something catastrophic happens to you.
Mhm.
And you have to learn how to live your life anew.
Right.
And so you go through that neutral zone
Mhm.
and accept what is and go on. And there are people who cannot accept what is, and they become the embittered journey.
There you go. That's,
Right.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
very similar to what we're going to be studying in small group.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yep. Good. Thanks. Any other reactions, especially if there's a strong negative reaction?
No, not negative. I'm off mute, right? Yes, I am. It's interesting. I went through, on the self-identity part, I didn't get to do that. I was more, had a crisis before the self-identity thing got to happen.
Mhm.
And it went on for a long time.
Mhm.
And so the graph that you have here makes sense to me. There's a keen desire, and yes, it's good, and to want to move towards self-identity.
Mhm.
And sometimes it happens later than age 35.
That's right. Yeah. Mhm.
And but you got to get past that crisis in order to, or well, in my case, get past the crisis so you can find self-identity. I guess there are those who can't get past their crisis for whatever reason. It's a physical or medical or mental that will never go away. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And they have to self-identify where they are.
Yes. And thanks for that, Peter. It does remind me, there's a part of this that I did leave out, and I'll just share in my own story. So I was quite a rebel as a youth, and reacted against my father. And I became a young fool and got into the countercultural aspects, especially with the drugs. And I became the young fool. And that's one of the tragic things about the journey, is that we do have a number of people who do get washed out as young fools. And so in the first half of life can be rather interrupted. And I'm not referring to you, Peter, at all in that, but there are certain things that can happen and people don't get to the point of self-identity. And so, I'll just share with you that the reason I'm an evangelical Anglican is that I went through a very divine healing that got me out of my young fool status and put me back on track towards self-identity to complete that first half of the journey. Does that help at all, Peter?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy for you.
Yeah, well, it just points out that God's healing can help, is essential in all these aspects. There are lots of people who I complete the first half of life and do actually color inside the lines, unlike myself, follow the rules and live a proper life. And they do so super well with first half of life. And that's that celebration we can give to people growing up and being active members of the church and of society. It's a wonderful journey and to be celebrated. And then we can also recognize that, at every point in one's life, we get to that transition, the big transition, where we can't continue or don't want to continue on the first half of life journey. And we can go into this adventure with God, this adventure of the holy fool, the wisdom journey, if you will, of following Jesus into these strange ways that don't look great at the beginning. So I do work with a lot of folks in spiritual direction and in ministerial training. And there's a pattern I see that when people get the call from God towards ordination, the call initially comes as the worst possible deal they could imagine. That God just gives people horrible deals at the beginning. And when they embrace it and move into it, they find that it's the most wonderful thing ever. And it's to be valued and treasured, but it's not, per se the American dream. It's not good when it comes to cost benefit analysis. In fact, it looks like it's going to cost a heck of a lot more than the benefits are from the outset. But the reality is, once we move into it, or whatever that calling God, every baptized Christian is called to ministry. So whatever it is that God's inviting us to do in the second half of life, at the beginning, it looks like the cost is horrible and I'm not going to get much out of it. But the reality is, and you all know this, you all are doing this, that the reality is it's wonderful. It's where our hearts are filled.
I guess this is just an embellishment of what you're saying, but the diagram here is missing some loops. And
Yes.
they're loops from, say, the young fool back to the hero's journey. There's a loop from the old fool back to the holy fool. There's a loop from the embittered journey back to the old fool, or embittered journey back to the holy fool. Life is much more complicated than this diagram.
It sure is. Yeah.
What you just said, there are loops that are very important in people's experiences.
Yeah, and all those loops are full of God, and that's where the excitement is, that we really can't break it, except for, as Helen pointed out from Richard Rohr, said the only thing that keeps us from going in the second half of life is ourselves. So there is that. We can choose not to go into this, but it's really hard to break it completely. That even if we take a wrong turn or go the wrong way for a while, God's got a way to get us back on track, and just being open.
The loops would be called grace.
Grace loops, yes, good. Hey, I may have to steal that from you, Art. I'll try to remember to give you credit. I don't know. Well, I don't know if that was helpful at all. Let me see if I can stop sharing, but I did want to just kind of share, the broad brushstrokes as we say goodbye to Richard Rohr. I'm really excited about the next book that we're going to start next week, and that's John Polkingham's book on the God of hope and the end of the world. So the ultimate falling upward is when we die, right?
Right.
That's a big falling.
Yeah.
And when I read the book a couple months ago, I realized, wow, this is a really important read for what's on the other side. That, we're moving towards resurrection, but we got to go through this fall. Anyway, and of course, along the road, we're all going to say goodbye to loved ones as well. And that's going to be an enormous fall. I'm not sure which I prefer. I think I'd rather be the one who dies than to say goodbye to my wife. But I know I don't have that choice. This book I found was so helpful in just actually that sense of God of hope and what the end looks like, or could look like. At least it's plausible from this guy who's a theologian and a physicist. And I look forward to the reading. I also look forward to asking Art lots of hard questions about in those first couple classes. It's going to be heavier on the physics. And I look forward to asking questions of Art, and I hope you all write down your questions. And even if you don't have the time or the energy to read the book, I'm going to just kind of guarantee that we're going to have exciting discussions, and that in the discussions, we'll have something for everyone, whether they've read it or not.
Would you say we were supposed to read chapters 1 and 2?
1 and 2, yeah. We're going to try to go at a clip of 2 chapters a week. They're not long chapters. Though there are some concepts that are kind of on the heavy side, he's not horrible. I mean, he really has mercy on his readers. His logic is tight. His writing is super. I mean, I think it's just fantastic. So I invite you all. Let's dive in, go into the deep end, see what it's like in there.
Okay.
Everybody excited? Are you excited?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're on mute, Art.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So in conclusion, for our concluding prayer, did you all read it wasn't, part of today's, but it was that last part called a meditation on a poem by Thomas Merton?
Yes.
I looked at it.
Did read
I
that.
wanted to use that, if you will, as our closing thoughts for what Thomas Merton describes as what Richard Rohr then calls, this is what it looks like to have the second half of life, and the emptying out rather than the filling up. First half of life is filling up our lives. Second half is emptying out so that we have loads of room for God and for others and for creation. So anybody want to read it? Helen, I know that was probably your favorite poem you've ever read in your entire life.
Well, I didn't read it.
Oh, I thought I saw you grimacing, so I was going to tease you. Anybody have it there that wants to read it?
I have it in front of me, but it's pretty long. I'd like to share it with somebody.
Okay, how about you read the first 2? They're not paragraphs. What are they called? They're not strophes either.
Stanzas, like stanzas.
Stanzas.
Yeah, you want to read the first couple and then someone else can pick it up?
Like I'll read down to be still. Okay.
Yeah.
When in the soul of the serene disciple, with no more fathers to imitate, poverty is a success. It is a small thing to say the roof is gone. He has not even a house. Stars as well as friends are angry with the noble ruin. Saints depart in several directions.
Okay, someone else?
Be still. There is no longer any need of comment. It was a lucky wind that blew away his halo with his cares, a lucky seed that drowned his reputation. Here you will find neither a proverb nor a memorandum. There are no ways, no methods to admire. Where poverty is no achievement, his God lives in his emptiness like affliction. What choice remains? Well, to be ordinary is not a choice. It is the usual freedom of men without visions.
So some of you are probably a lot better with poetry than I am.
And,
I do get this that sense from Thomas Merton, who had spent his first half of life, and he wrote the book, The 7-Story Mountain, which is all about his first half of life journey. Have any of you read Merton, 7-Story Mountain? Wonderful book.
I think so.
It was one of the biggies. Oh, did he write it in the 60s, maybe 50s or 60s? But because of that one book, and I'm not sure it ever went out of print. It's a famous book for spirituality. But he documents his transition from being a very worldly person to then an atheist, or at least agnostic, to then moving into the Roman Catholic Church and then entering the Trappists as a monk. After that, the printing of that book, there were so many people coming into the Trappist and into the Roman Catholic Church and into the priesthood. So it was huge for the Roman Catholic Church. But then he discovered in this Trappist monastery that he had a really huge ego that needed to be propped up. And in his writings, he got so much attention that he became famous. He became the rock star of Roman Catholics in the 20th century. From that, then he realized this was not working for him. He was not growing spiritually by becoming successful and famous. So he went through this process of just emptying out his life, and he moved into a hermitage. He started his inner religious dialogue with Buddhists, and he began to then just start discarding things that the ego was finding was propped up. And as his ego started to come down, that's when he realized, okay, there's room now for God. And that's a big part of this spiritual journey, is just we get to the point for success, we reach the top, we get our life together, it's starting to look good, and then doggone it, that ego takes over and starts to turn into an idol that we worship. And it becomes kind of like, even different than an idol perhaps, but becomes like the Pharaoh over the slaves in Egypt, and keeps saying more bricks, less straw, more bricks. And it's punishing, it's all internal, but it's just hard to even sleep at night because this thing is going off on us, causing us to always do more, play the game, double down. And eventually people just get so tired of it and realize they're not growing spiritually because of that big out of proportion ego that's become the master instead of a servant. And that's the second half of journey, is when a person decides, nah, I got to get rid of that thing. That thing's not helping me at all. And all the props that keep the ego in place, and that includes, reputation, power, titles, places, possessions. The more we can live without some of those things, the more the ego comes down, and there's room for God. And that's where the spiritual second half of life really kicks in its fullness. So it's past our time. Thank you all for giving me these extra 7 minutes. I look forward to reading the next book with all of you. And I'm really excited that we can ask Art lots of questions and learn all that we have been wondering about from physics.
Like what it is.
Yeah, like what it is.
Right.
At least it's not calculus, right? So
I'm
I
not
don't know
sure
what that is either.
I'm not sure I know enough to even ask questions.
well, we're going to find out.
All right.
Okay. See you next
Okay.
week.
Bye.
Yeah.
See you, everybody. Oh, and Bev and I are now going to a movie. First movie we've been to since COVID.
Oh,
Yay. See ya.
Bye.
good one.
Bye.